The night was heavy with silence, interrupted only by the faint hum of distant traffic. Officer Jake Coleman, a seasoned cop with over a decade on the force, was finishing his patrol in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was supposed to be another uneventful evening. But as he turned a corner near the dimly lit park, he froze. There, beneath the weak glow of a flickering street lamp, stood a man in a dark hoodie gripping a little girl's wrist. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, her pink jacket standing out like a beacon against the man's shadowy figure. Something about the scene was wrong. Terribly wrong. Jake parked his cruiser and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. The man glanced up, his face partially obscured by the hoodie, and tugged the girl closer to him. She didn't resist, but her wide eyes darted to Jake, silently screaming for help. "Everything all right here?" Jake asked, keeping his voice steady but firm. His hand hovered near his holster, the weight of his training pressing on him like a vice. The man's smile was unervingly calm. "Just taking my niece home, officer. She was playing a little too late at the park." Jake's instincts screamed at him. This didn't add up. The girl's trembling lip, the way she clutched a stuffed bunny to her chest, and the man's overly relaxed demeanor all painted a picture he didn't like. He crouched slightly, leveling his gaze with the girl's. "Hey there, sweetheart. What's your name?" Jake asked gently. The man shifted uncomfortably. "We really should get going. It's getting late." The girl cut him off, her tiny voice trembling as she spoke 5 words that chilled Jake to his core. "I don't know this man." Jake's blood ran cold. The man's expression twisted in an instant. Gone was the fake friendliness, replaced by something darker. Jake reached for his gun, his voice booming. "Step away from the girl." "No." But the man didn't comply. Instead, he tightened his grip on her wrist and took a step back, his eyes darting around as if calculating his next move. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know if the man had a weapon or how far he'd go to keep control of the girl, but one thing was clear: this wasn't going to end quietly. "Let her go," Jake barked, his voice echoing into the night. And then, like a flash, the man bolted, dragging the girl with him. The scene exploded into chaos as Jake gave chase, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The girl's cries echoed off the empty streets, and Jake's mind raced with a single unshakable thought: he cannot get away. Jake's feet pounded the pavement as he pursued the man into the shadowy depths of the park. The suspect was fast, weaving through the maze of trees like someone who had something to lose. But Jake was faster, his training and adrenaline kicking into overdrive. His flashlight's beam bobbed erratically as he ran, occasionally catching glimpses of the girl's pink jacket or the man's dark hoodie. "Stop! Police!" Jake shouted, his voice cutting through the still night. The man didn't stop. Instead, he veered sharply into a cluster of thick bushes. Jake followed, the branches clawing at his uniform as he pushed through. He could hear the girl crying now, her voice growing fainter as the man tried to put more distance between them. Then, suddenly, Jake burst into a small clearing, and it was empty. The man and the girl had vanished. Jake spun in a circle, his flashlight darting across the trees. His breathing was ragged, his pulse roaring in his ears. The silence was deafening. He reached for his radio. "Suspect fled on foot, heading east through Memorial Park," Jake reported quickly. "Male, mid-30s, wearing a dark hoodie. He's got the girl with him. Requesting backup." The dispatcher's voice crackled back, but Jake barely registered the words. His eyes caught something on the ground, a single shoe. Small, pink, and unmistakably belonging to the girl. He crouched and picked it up, a lump forming in his throat. She had lost her shoe in the struggle, probably while trying to resist. He tightened his grip on it, the smooth leather a silent reminder of what was at stake. Then, from somewhere in the distance, he heard it, a muffled cry. It was faint, almost lost to the wind, but it was enough to set him back in motion. Jake followed the sound, his flashlight slicing through the dark. He kept his footsteps quiet now, not wanting to alert the suspect. As he approached a narrow trail, he saw movement up ahead, a figure dragging something, struggling to keep pace. Jake slowed, steadying his gun. He could see the man now, hunched over and muttering curses under his breath as he yanked the girl along. Her hands were bound, her face streaked with tears. She looked up and saw Jake, her eyes widening in recognition. Jake's heart leapt into his throat. He couldn't risk the man hurting her if he panicked. He took a deep breath and called out, his voice low but commanding. "Let her go. This is your last warning." The man froze, his shoulders stiffening. Slowly, he turned, dragging the girl in front of him like a shield. His free hand reached into his hoodie pocket, and Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't do it," Jake warned. "Whatever you're thinking, it's not worth it." The man sneered. "You take one step closer, and she's done." Jake's mind raced. He couldn't see what the man had in his pocket. A weapon, maybe? A knife. He couldn't take any chances. "You don't have to do this," Jake said, his tone softening. "Let her go, and we can figure this out. Nobody needs to get hurt." The man's grip on the girl loosened slightly, and for a moment, Jake thought he might actually comply. But then the man lunged, not at Jake, but toward the trail, dragging the girl with him again. Jake fired. The shot rang out, shattering the night's stillness. The man cried out in pain, stumbling forward and releasing the girl. She fell to the ground, scrambling away on all fours. Jake rushed forward, kicking the man's hand away as he reached for something in his pocket, a switchblade. "Stay down," Jake ordered, pinning the man to the ground. The man groaned but didn't resist. Jake cuffed him, the adrenaline coursing through his veins making his hands tremble. He glanced over at the girl, who had crawled to a nearby tree and was clutching her stuffed bunny like a lifeline. "It's okay," Jake said gently. "You're safe now." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, but her lips quivered as if she wanted to say something. Jake crouched beside her, lowering his voice. "What is it, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "He's not alone." Jake's heart sank at the girl's whispered words. "He's not alone." He glanced at the man writhing in pain on the ground, his face twisted in rage. Jake tightened the cuffs and yanked him to his feet. "Who's with you?" Jake demanded, his voice sharp. The man only sneered, his lips curling into a mocking grin. "You'll find out soon enough," the man spat, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "But by then, it'll be too late." Jake's grip on his shoulder tightened. He turned back to the girl, who was trembling but standing now, clutching her stuffed bunny so tightly it looked like it might burst. "Do you know what he means?" Jake asked gently. She shook her head but looked toward the darkened trail, her eyes filled with fear. "He was on the phone earlier," she whispered. "He said someone was waiting." Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach. His training kicked in. The girl's safety was his top priority. He quickly radioed for backup again. "I've got the suspect in custody and the girl safe, but she's indicated there may be others involved. Request immediate units to sweep the area." "Copy that, units en route," the dispatcher responded. Jake knelt in front of the girl, lowering his voice to keep her calm. "You're doing so great, okay? But I need to know, did you hear anything else? Names? Where they might be?" Her tiny voice trembled as she spoke. He said something about a cabin." "A cabin?" Jake pressed, trying to hide the urgency in his tone. She nodded. "In the woods." He said someone was waiting there." The man chuckled behind Jake. "She's got a sharp little memory, huh? Too bad you'll never find it." Jake ignored him, standing and gripping the suspect by the back of his hoodie. "We'll see about that." Minutes later, backup arrived, and the park was swarming with officers. Jake handed the suspect over to his colleagues, relaying everything the girl had told him. The man refused to speak further, his silence punctuated only by the occasional smug grin. Jake felt the weight of time pressing down on him. If there was someone else in the woods, potentially at a cabin, it was only a matter of time before they realized the plan had gone sideways. "Search teams are sweeping the park," one of the officers informed Jake. "We'll expand the perimeter as needed." Jake nodded but couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin was key. If they waited too long, the other accomplice, or accomplices, might disappear, and with them, any chance of understanding what had really happened here. "I'll take her to the station," Jake said, motioning toward the girl. "She's been through enough." The girl looked up at him, her eyes still brimming with tears. "Are they going to get me again?" Jake crouched down, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Not while I'm around," he said firmly. "You're safe now." I promise. But as the words left his mouth, he couldn't help but feel the lingering tension in the air. There was more to this than one man and a single abduction attempt. The girl's fear ran deeper than anything he'd seen before, and Jake knew that whatever waited for them at the cabin, if it even existed, was something far worse than he could imagine. As Jake loaded the girl into the back of his patrol car, he couldn't help but glance toward the woods one last time. The darkness seemed impenetrable, hiding secrets that refused to reveal themselves. He climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tightly. "All right, sweetheart," he said, glancing at her in the rear-view mirror. "Let's get you somewhere safe." But as they drove away, the girl's voice piped up again, barely audible but cutting through the silence like a knife. "He said they'll come for me if they know I'm gone." Jake's grip on the wheel tightened, and for the first time that night, he wondered if they'd just scratched the surface of something much larger. Jake couldn't shake the girl's ominous words as they drove toward the station. The faint glow of the dashboard lights illuminated her pale face in the rear-view mirror. She clutched the stuffed bunny like a lifeline, her small frame trembling despite the heater blowing warm air. "They'll come for me if they know I'm gone." The phrase echoed in Jake's mind. Who were they? And what kind of people would orchestrate something like this? He had dealt with gangs, kidnappers, and even organized crime in his career, but this felt different. More calculated. More dangerous. Jake's radio crackled, snapping him from his thoughts. "Coleman, this is dispatch. Units are sweeping the area, but no signs of additional suspects so far. Do you need additional support?" He hesitated, glancing at the girl before responding. "Negative for now. I'm heading to the station with the child. Keep me updated." "Copy that." The girl spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said they'd take me back to the cabin." Jake's eyes flicked to her in the mirror. "Do you remember anything else about the cabin? Anything that might help us find it?" She shook her head slowly. "I didn't see much. Just trees. Lots of trees. It was dark." Jake sighed. The woods surrounding the park were vast, with dozens of remote hunting cabins scattered throughout. It could take days, weeks even, to search every one. And if there were more people involved, they wouldn't wait around to be found. When they arrived at the station, Jake led the girl inside, keeping a protective hand on her shoulder. The fluorescent lights of the lobby seemed almost too bright after the suffocating darkness of the park. He directed her to a seat near the desk sergeant and handed her a cup of hot cocoa from the vending machine. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Jake asked as he knelt in front of her. "Emma," she said softly. "All right, Emma. I know you've been really brave tonight, and I promise we're going to keep you safe." He hesitated before asking, "Do you have family nearby? Someone we can call?" Her face crumpled, and tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "They took me from the park. I was waiting for my mom to come back." Jake's stomach twisted. A mother somewhere was likely frantic, not knowing what had happened to her daughter. He motioned to the desk sergeant to start running checks on missing child reports. They needed to find out who Emma was and where she belonged. Hours passed, and the station buzzed with activity. Officers returned from the park with no sign of the mysterious cabin or additional suspects. Jake stayed by Emma's side, trying to piece together the fragments of information she'd provided. But the case was proving more complex than he anticipated. Then, just after midnight, an officer approached Jake with a grim expression. "We found something in the woods." Jake stood, his pulse quickening. "What is it?" The officer handed him a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a cell phone, its screen cracked but still functional. "It was near where you apprehended the suspect. It's locked, but tech's working on getting into it now." Jake examined the phone, noting the dark, smudged fingerprints on the case. If it belonged to the suspect, it might hold crucial information, contacts, messages, even GPS data. But they wouldn't know for sure until it was unlocked. Then the officer added, "There's more. We found tire tracks leading deeper into the woods. They match a vehicle registration that's flagged. Stolen van." Jake's jaw tightened. A stolen van, a phone, a cabin in the woods. It was all starting to come together, but they still lacked the most critical piece of the puzzle, where the girl had been taken before tonight. He turned back to Emma, who had fallen asleep in the chair, her bunny tucked under her chin. The image was heartbreaking, but it fueled Jake's resolve. Whoever had orchestrated this wasn't going to stop at one failed attempt. As Jake contemplated the next move, his radio buzzed again. "Coleman, we've got something." The phone's unlocked. He grabbed the device and headed to the tech station, his mind racing. What would they find? A lead to the cabin? Evidence of a larger operation? Jake's gut told him they were on the brink of discovering something far bigger than a single abduction. But when he saw the first unlocked message on the screen, his blood ran cold. Plan B in motion. Meet at the cabin before dawn. Jake stared at the message on the phone. Plan B in motion. Meet at the cabin before dawn. A chill ran down his spine. Whoever had sent this wasn't deterred by the botched kidnapping. They were adapting, and fast. The phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. Another message appeared. ETA 45 minutes, don't screw this up. Jake glanced at the clock on the wall. It was just after 1 a.m. He needed to move quickly. Jake called for a briefing in the station's operations room. The officers gathered around the map of the surrounding area, and he quickly relayed what they knew so far. The phone indicates a meeting at a cabin before dawn. Emma's mentioned a cabin in the woods, but we still don't have a precise location, Jake explained, his voice firm. We found tire tracks leading deeper into the forest. That's our best lead. Do we know how many suspects we're dealing with? One officer asked. Jake shook his head. At least one more, possibly more. These people are coordinated. This isn't just a random abduction. The desk sergeant entered the room, holding a file. We've confirmed Emma's identity, he announced. Her full name is Emma Carter, age 8. Reported missing 4 hours ago by her mother, Jennifer Carter. The mom's en route to the station now. Jake exhaled with relief. At least they'd found Emma in time. But the case wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. All right, Jake said, turning back to the map. We'll form search teams to track the tire marks and find this cabin. I'll lead the first team. The officers nodded, their determination palpable. They knew this wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about protecting a little girl and potentially stopping something far worse. Jake's team was on the move within minutes, following the trail of tire tracks into the woods. The air was thick with tension as they trudged through the dense forest, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Jake kept his radio close, his ears straining for any sound that didn't belong. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers called out. Tracks end here. Jake moved to the front of the group. The tracks veered off into a narrow path, barely visible in the underbrush. His flashlight caught the faint glint of a metal chain hanging from a tree, a no trespassing sign. We're close, Jake muttered. The group proceeded cautiously, weapons drawn. As they pushed deeper into the woods, the silhouette of a small cabin emerged in the distance. Its windows were dark, but the faint glow of a lantern seeped through a crack in the curtains. Jake signaled for the team to stop. Hold position, he whispered. We don't know how many are inside. One officer moved forward, crouching low to peer through a side window. He gestured back to Jake, holding up 2 fingers, 2 suspects. Jake nodded, formulating a plan. We'll split into 2 groups. One goes in through the front, the other covers the back. No one makes a move until I give the signal. The officers spread out, their movements quiet and deliberate. Jake's heart pounded as he positioned himself near the front door. He could hear faint voices from inside, muffled but agitated. He was supposed to bring her here, a man's voice hissed. He got caught, idiot, a woman snapped back. We need to move before they trace us. Jake took a deep breath and gave the signal. The door burst open with a deafening crack. Jake and his team surged inside, weapons drawn. The suspects, a man and a woman, froze, their hands shooting into the air. On a nearby table sat a bundle of rope, duct tape, and an empty cage large enough to fit a child. Don't move, Jake barked. The man lunged for the table, but an officer tackled him to the ground. The woman screamed, trying to back away, but Jake had her covered. It's over, Jake said, his voice cold. Where were you planning to take her? The woman glared at him, defiant. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Jake stepped closer, his jaw tightening. Try me. She smirked, her confidence unnerving. You think saving that girl stopped anything? You're too late. They're already here. Jake's blood ran cold. Who's here? The woman's silence spoke volumes. Back at the station, Emma's mother had arrived, her tearful reunion with her daughter a brief reprieve from the chaos. Jake stood outside the observation room, watching as Emma clung to her mother. But his mind was elsewhere, on the woman's chilling words. Who were they? And what was already in motion? Jake paced the station's hallway, replaying the woman's cryptic words over and over in his mind. They're already here. Her smirk had stayed with him, an unsettling reminder that this wasn't over. The two suspects were in separate interrogation rooms now, and Jake stood outside, trying to decide which one to tackle first. He glanced at his partner, Officer Laura Bennett, who had been called in to assist. She was sharp, calm under pressure, and exactly the kind of backup Jake needed. Who do we start with? Laura asked, her arms crossed as she leaned against the wall. Jake thought for a moment, then pointed to the woman's room. She's the mouthpiece. Let's see if we can get her to slip. Laura nodded, and the two of them entered the room. The woman sat with her hands cuffed to the table, her demeanor eerily calm. She looked up as they entered, her smirk returning. Back for more, she said, her voice dripping with mockery. I told you, it's already too late. Jake ignored her bait. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her while Laura stood by the door, her arms folded. You've got a chance to make this easier on yourself, Jake said. Who's involved? What were you planning to do with Emma? The woman leaned back, her smirk widening. You think this is about just one girl? Jake's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. Then why don't you enlighten me? She leaned forward suddenly, her eyes glinting with something uncomfortably close to glee. You're in way over your head, officer. You think this is just some small-time operation? There's a bigger plan in motion, one you can't stop. Jake exchanged a glance with Laura, who subtly shook her head, signaling that the woman was still playing games. He decided to switch tactics. We found your messages, Jake said, pulling out the suspect's phone. He placed it on the table, its screen lit up with the incriminating texts. Plan B. The cabin. Looks like you're not as clever as you think. For the first time, the woman's smirk faltered. It was brief, but Jake caught it. She knew they were closing in. Tell me what Plan B is, Jake pressed. And maybe, I can help you. She hesitated, her bravado slipping for a moment before she recovered. You'll never find them in time. Find who? Jake demanded, his voice rising. She stared at him, her lips curling into a smile again. The others. Jake slammed his hands on the table, making her jump. Enough games. Where are they? Who else is involved? The woman laughed, a chilling, hollow sound. You think you're saving anyone? By sunrise, this town won't know what hit it. Leaving the interrogation room, Jake felt more frustrated than ever. Laura caught up with him in the hallway. She's taunting us, Laura said. But I think she's scared, too. She knows we're close. Close to what? Jake asked, running a hand through his hair. She's talking in riddles. Laura hesitated, then said, We still have the guy. He might crack faster. Jake nodded and headed toward the second interrogation room. Inside, the male suspect sat hunched over, his head bowed. Unlike the woman, he looked rattled, sweat beading on his forehead. Jake stepped in, his tone cold and direct. Your partner's already talking, Jake lied, watching the man's reaction carefully. She's putting it all on you. The man's head snapped up, panic flashing in his eyes. She's lying, he blurted. She's the one running things. Jake exchanged a glance with Laura. The crack was starting to show. So, she's the leader? Jake pressed. Good. That makes your role easier to explain. What's the plan? The man's hands fidgeted in the cuffs, his eyes darting nervously around the room. I don't know everything, he stammered. I just did what she told me. I swear. Which is? Jake demanded. She said. The man swallowed hard. She said we needed to grab the girl because she was special. That's all I know. They just said she's part of the plan. Jake leaned in, his voice low and menacing. What plan? The man hesitated, then mumbled, There's a transport. A truck. They're moving more kids. Jake's heart stopped. Where? The man shook his head frantically. I don't know. I just know it's happening before dawn. They didn't tell me the location. Jake straightened, fury boiling inside him. This was bigger than he'd imagined. Listen to me, Jake said, his voice like steel. If you know anything else, anything at all, and you're holding back, you'll go down for every single thing they've done. Do you understand? The man nodded quickly, his fear palpable. There's a warehouse, he blurted. They mentioned it once. Near the old docks. Jake exchanged a look with Laura. This was the lead they needed. Within minutes, Jake and Laura were coordinating a raid on the warehouse. The suspect's words echoed in his mind as he geared up with the SWAT team. She's part of the plan. What made Emma so important? And how many other children were they planning to take? The clock was ticking, and dawn was fast approaching. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited them at the warehouse would be worse than anything he'd seen before. The convoy of police vehicles raced through the deserted streets toward the old docks. Jake sat in the lead car, gripping the wheel tightly as Laura reviewed the raid plan beside him. We'll surround the warehouse and secure all exits, Laura said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. If they're inside, they won't have anywhere to run. Jake nodded, his mind racing. The male suspect's words still lingered. There's a transport. A truck. They're moving more kids. He couldn't afford to let this operation fail, not when the stakes were so high. As they neared the docks, the hulking silhouette of the warehouse loomed ahead. It was an old, rusted structure, its faded exterior a testament to decades of abandonment. But tonight, it wasn't empty. Jake killed the engine a block away, and the team moved in on foot, weapons drawn. The air was thick with tension, the faint sound of waves lapping against the shore the only noise breaking the silence. Jake raised a fist, signaling for the team to halt. He crouched behind a stack of shipping crates, scanning the warehouse. A faint light glowed from one of the upper windows, confirming someone was inside. He gestured to Laura. Take your team around back. Cover the exits. No one gets out. She nodded, and her group disappeared into the shadows. Jake's heart pounded as he led the front team closer to the building. The faint hum of a generator became audible, along with muffled voices from inside. Jake motioned for the team to stack up by the main entrance. He signaled a countdown with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. The door burst open with a deafening crash, and the team stormed in, shouting commands. Police! Hands in the air! Nobody move! The interior was a chaotic scene. Rows of wooden crates lined the walls, and in the center of the room stood a large truck, its back doors open. Inside, Jake could see several small figures huddled together, children. His stomach turned as he counted them. 6, 7, 8. Near the truck, 3 men froze, their faces filled with shock. 2 of them reached for weapons, but the officers were faster, subduing them with swift precision. The third man bolted toward the back exit, only to run straight into Laura's team. Clear! Laura called out. Jake approached the truck, his gun still drawn, as other officers began cutting the children's restraints. They looked terrified, their eyes wide with fear. Some clung to each other, too scared to move. You're safe now, Jake said, his voice as calm as he could manage. We're here to help. One of the older children, a boy around 10, pointed toward the far end of the warehouse. They talked about her, he stammered. The girl. Jake's chest tightened. Emma. The boy nodded. They said she was the one they needed. That she was different. Jake exchanged a look with Laura, who had just joined him. What does that mean? She asked. The boy shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I don't know. But they kept saying she was important. Special. As the children were escorted to safety, Jake and Laura turned their attention to the suspects, who were now cuffed and seated on the floor. Jake knelt in front of the one who appeared to be in charge, a burly man with a shaved head and a cold glare. Start talking, Jake demanded. What's this all about? Why were you targeting Emma? The man smirked, his defiance eerily similar to the woman's from earlier. You think you've won? You don't even know what you've stepped into. Jake grabbed the man by the front of his shirt, dragging him closer. Then tell me, what's the plan? The man leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. Emma's the key. You'll see soon enough. Jake shoved him back, frustration boiling inside him. These cryptic answers weren't helping, and time was running out to figure out what they meant. As the suspects were transported back to the station and the children taken to safety, Jake sat in his car, staring at the dark horizon. The pieces of the puzzle didn't fit, and the clock was ticking. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the text messages retrieved from the earlier suspect's device. One thread caught his attention. It was from an unknown number, and the most recent message read, "Is she secure? We're en route." Jake's breath hitched. The timestamp was just minutes old. He quickly called dispatch. "I need all available units back to the station now. Emma's still in danger." At the station, Emma sat with her mother in a private room, unaware of the storm brewing around them. Jake burst through the doors, his urgency palpable. "We need to move her," Jake said to Laura. "If they're coming for her, we can't stay here." Laura didn't argue, immediately coordinating with the rest of the team. But as they prepared to transfer Emma to a safer location, the lights in the station flickered, and then went out entirely. The building plunged into darkness. Jake's radio crackled to life, a panicked voice on the other end. "This is Officer Ramirez. We've got intruders at the perimeter." Jake's blood ran cold as he heard the faint echo of footsteps approaching from outside. The station was cloaked in darkness, the silence punctuated only by the frantic voices crackling over the radio. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears as he motioned for his team to form a perimeter around Emma and her mother. They huddled in a secure room, the faint glow of emergency lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. "They've cut the power," Laura whispered, her gun drawn. "They're coming." Jake's radio buzzed again. Multiple suspects approaching from the east and west sides, Officer Ramirez reported. Heavily armed. Jake grabbed the radio. "Hold the line. Do not let them breach." He turned to Laura. "We need to move Emma. If they're here for her, this building's a trap." Laura nodded. "The rear exit leads to the underground garage. We can secure a vehicle and get her out." Jake crouched in front of Emma and her mother, his voice calm but firm. "Emma, we're going to take you and your mom to a safe place. Stay close to me, okay?" Emma nodded, clutching her stuffed bunny tightly. Her mother, Jennifer, looked at Jake with desperation. "Please," she whispered. "Just keep her safe." Jake led the group through the dimly lit hallways, his weapon at the ready. Laura covered the rear, her sharp eyes scanning for any movement. The team's footsteps were muffled, their pace quick but cautious. They reached the garage just as the first gunshot rang out, echoing through the station. Jake's radio erupted with shouts from the officers outside. "They're breaching the main entrance." Jake cursed under his breath, signaling to Laura to hurry. The group piled into an unmarked SUV. Jake climbed into the driver's seat, Laura taking the passenger side, and they sped out of the garage as the sounds of chaos erupted behind them. The SUV barreled down the empty streets, Jake's hands gripping the wheel tightly. He glanced at the rearview mirror, his heart sinking as a pair of black SUVs appeared behind them, their headlights cutting through the darkness. "They're following us," Laura said, her voice tense. Jake pressed the gas pedal harder, weaving through the streets in a desperate bid to lose their pursuers. But the black SUVs were relentless, closing the gap with alarming speed. "Hang on!" Jake shouted as he swerved onto a narrow back road leading toward the outskirts of town. The chase was relentless. The black SUVs gained ground, their drivers clearly trained and coordinated. Then, the lead vehicle rammed into the back of Jake's SUV, sending a jolt through the car. "They're trying to force us off the road," Laura shouted, raising her weapon and firing a shot through the rear window. The pursuing vehicle swerved but didn't stop. Emma whimpered in the back seat, and Jennifer hugged her tightly. "Stay down, baby," she whispered. Jake made a split-second decision. "We can't outrun them. We'll have to fight." He swerved off the road, pulling into an abandoned industrial lot. The SUV skidded to a halt, dust kicking up around it. Jake and Laura jumped out, taking cover behind the vehicle as the black SUVs screeched to a stop nearby. The attackers emerged, clad in tactical gear and armed with high-powered rifles. Jake counted at least 6 of them. This wasn't a random group of thugs, these were professionals. "Give us the girl," one of them shouted, his voice cold and commanding. Jake's grip on his gun tightened. "Over my dead body." The firefight erupted in an instant, bullets tearing through the night. Jake and Laura returned fire, their training keeping them calm under pressure. But they were outnumbered, and the attackers were advancing. Then, Emma's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. "Stop!" Jake turned to see her standing beside the SUV, her stuffed bunny clutched in one hand. She was trembling, but her eyes were fierce. "Emma, get back!" Jake shouted. But the attackers froze. One of them stepped forward, lowering his weapon. "It's true," he said, almost in awe. "She's the one." Jake was baffled. "What are you talking about?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he raised a small device, a remote with a blinking red light. Jake's instincts screamed at him. "Get down!" he shouted. An explosion ripped through the air as one of the SUVs detonated, engulfing the lot in flames. Jake shielded Emma with his body as debris rained down. When the dust settled, the attackers were gone, fled into the night, leaving behind only chaos and questions. Back at the station, Emma and her mother were placed under heavy protection. Jake sat in the briefing room, his mind racing as he replayed the night's events. The attackers hadn't been trying to kill Emma. They wanted her alive. "Why is she so important?" Jake asked aloud, his frustration boiling over. Laura handed him a file. "Maybe this will help." I had a friend in child services dig into her background. Jake opened the file, scanning the documents. What he found made his blood run cold. Emma had been part of an experimental medical trial as an infant, a trial linked to a powerful biotech company. The trial had been abruptly shut down, and all records of it erased. "She's a loose thread," Laura said grimly. "They're cleaning up their mess." Jake slammed the file shut. "Not on my watch." As dawn broke over the city, Jake stood guard outside Emma's room, his resolve stronger than ever. The fight wasn't over, but one thing was certain: whatever secrets Emma held, he would protect her with everything he had. What do you think Emma's secret is? How far will Jake go to protect her? Share your theories in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning.